So again, I have no idea if this will have to be broken up into 2 different lectures or not. But if somebody, in case I miss it, when it's around 10, please let me know and you'll take your next break. If I have to break this up into 2, not a problem whatsoever. All right. So again, I kind of did this a little ass backwards, but I decided I wanted to go through those 2 tough ones first. All right. And then explain to you all about responsive design. Okay. So we're on page 281, and they mention in the first 7 chapters of the book, you learn how to create web pages, you learn how to create the content using HTML, you learn how to format them using CSS. All right, as it says, because more and more websites are being accessed on mobile devices, it's important to develop pages that adapt, and that's responsive design. The first thing that I did before the lecture this morning was I went out to W3 Schools and I looked up what they had to say about responsive design. All right, and there's a bunch of stuff in here, but this is it in a nutshell. A web page should look good on any device. All right, and it should be able to look good on devices that today people are just thinking about. All right, I don't know if you've seen commercials. I have a little bit on TV with, for example, some of the new refrigerators that are supposed to talk to you and stuff. The idea is eventually all of your appliances you may be able to bring up a web page right from your appliance. So if something isn't working, you'd be able to bring up the web page, and you may even be able to link to the company, and they may be able to help try to debug whatever it is you're working on. All right, whatever your appliance is, right while the appliance is up there and running. Because I've heard all sorts of talk. They want to do that. They even want to do that with your automobile. They want to be able to sit there and work on your car. I find this scary, but possibly in the future, while your car is moving and you're in it. So you might be alerted there's a problem with your brakes, and they're going to be able to go in there and try as much as they can to fix it, or at least to make your car as drivable as possible until you can get into a dealership. All right. The good news is by the time that all happens, all right, and it's all up and running and everything, I won't be teaching anymore. I'll be retired. All right. Okay. So when you look in here, they'll talk about the 3 components of responsive design, how to test for responsive design. I'm going to show you a way of doing that in just a minute. How to implement a fluid design. Again, fluid versus fixed. Fluid meaning more than anything else, M's and REMs, and we'll talk about those in a minute, as opposed, and percentages, as opposed to points and pixels. All right? How to use media queries. You're going to have to write media queries. You're going to have to write these. You will write these on your next test. We will start looking at them today. Finally, you'll have a web page that uses responsive design techniques. All right. So what they mentioned is way back in Chapter 1, they talked about responsive design. This is the author's definition. It's basically, it's a web page that adapts to the size of the screen while making sure that the site has a consistent look and feel. In order to do this, there's 3 main components. All right. The first one is you use fluid layout versus fixed layout. First one. All right. Second is you want your images to adapt. So in other words, if I showed you before that Milwaukee Journal Sentinel site, and I showed you how it wasn't responsive. All right. But the idea is if I've got a mobile version, I'm not going to be able to put an image in here that's going to take up my entire the entire screen on my laptop or desktop. I want to shrink it down. It's very simple to do. All right. And we'll want to use media queries. So those are the 3 components that we're going to talk about in this chapter. So this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. Here is the WWF, I think that's the World Wildlife Federation. I know there was an interesting story I read years ago that there's also a wrestling thing that used to be called WWF, and this WWF sued them because they actually had the name WWF. So, but the idea is that's the way that it would look on, probably a laptop or a desktop. Here's how it looks on a phone, portrait. Here's how it looks on a phone, landscape. All right. One thing for you to realize, understand, or whatever, that when it's the spring of 2020 and you're taking the last class in the program, all right, we will be working with Android, and by that time, if I have my way, the book we're going to be using, we're just going to keep building games. All right. And a lot of times, for example, when you build games, you only want the user to be able to tilt their device, all right, and look at it landscape. You don't want it to play portrait. It just wouldn't work. So there's ways that you can set something up, and you can do the same thing on a web page. Now, normally on a web page, you want to allow the person to look at it in either direction. In other words, portrait or landscape. All right. So these three components, again, I'm sure, I haven't looked yet, but I'm sure these will find their way onto your next test. Fluid layout, media queries, scalable images. All right. Those are the three hallmarks, so to speak, for responsive design. So it says, how can you test? Well, let's look at how you can test for this. All right. So, for example, here's the Get Bootstrap website. Everybody see that? That's the Get Bootstrap website. You may or may not remember, but one of the things that I told you before is if you hit the F12 key, it breaks this up in two, okay? And it shows you on the bottom there, it shows you all the CSS, etc. that's in here. Well, one thing I didn't show you is if you look over here and you look way over here, see where it says, I think it's toggle device, but we're going to find out, toolbar. All right. When you come in here, what you can do is you can say, hey, I wonder how this would look, and you can set this stuff up to show exactly what it would look like on an iPhone, on an iPad, etc. The simplest way to do it is to come in here, but the other way you can do it, and this is what I'd recommend you all do sooner, not later, is that you go out here, and especially if you're using Chrome, I imagine they've got similar things in other browsers, but I'm going to say Chrome Web Store. All right. And when you look in here, these are extensions, so they are things that you can add to Chrome. The majority of them are free. Just click a button. Boom. You're able to use them. So I'm going out to Chrome Web Store extensions. All right. I'm going to click the hyperlink. And what do you want? Well, it says search the store. I'm going to come in here and say responsive design. All right. And I'm going to click right there. And they've got different responsive design checkers. They tell you how to do it in the book. Maybe it wasn't responsive design. Maybe it was responsive websites. I don't remember. But they show you how to do it in the book. All right. And when you do that, you can just add it. So if I wanted to start using one of these, all I'd have to do would be add to Chrome. And then what you're going to see is up here when you're in Chrome, it's going to give you a little icon. And when you click the icon, then you can use it. That's all there is to it. All right. And then you'll be able to, I mean, have you noticed how when I've done stuff like this and I've shrunk this down, etc., that's fine and dandy. But, I might say, well, this is what it's going to look like, for example, on a phone. No, it isn't. It's pretty similar to what it'll look like on a phone, but it's not exact. But if you download those extensions, you can see exactly what it would look like. Plus, it'll show you earlier versions of browsers, most of them. I want to see, for example, I don't know why, but if I know that person X has got IE6, it's like, wow, that's like 10 years. It doesn't matter. They're using IE6 and they're not going to get rid of it. There are companies that are out there. I'm not saying they're using IE6, but there are companies that are out there that if you go to work for them, you might say, I'll never use IE. No, the company uses IE, and that's the only browser they allow you to use. And they may have a certain version of that, and you are required, if you are using one of their machines, to use that version of that browser. So again, this is the example that I just showed you. All right, and they talk about what to do in Chrome. And they tell you the equivalent in IE, Edge, or Firefox. So if you're using one of those, you should be able to do it on any of them. All right, so how to implement a fluid design. Again, fluid layout versus fixed layout. Does it make sense? Everybody in here. If I say that, if I set the width to 960px, does it make sense? That's a fixed layout. All right. It's 960 pixels. Boom. All right. So when you work with pixels and you work with points, they are fixed in size. They're not meant to scale. When you work with M's and rems and percentages, they are meant to scale. So when you talk fluid design, the idea is, all right, as it says, it should adjust to the size of the screen accordingly. Now, quite often with web pages, what that means is you're going to use percentages. No, not M's and rems, percentages. All right. What that's saying right there, the width of the page is 90%. So it doesn't matter if it's a phone, and if it's a phone landscape, or it's a phone portrait, or it's whatever, use 90% of whatever that area is. The one thing you've got to watch out for, and a couple of you came up and talked to me when you were doing those box exercises. You know, there was a box exercise, I think there was one that kind of looked like this. You had a color here, you had a color there. Then you were supposed to have something there, for example, and maybe something there. I don't remember. But the idea is yours was almost done, except this thing right here was pushed way down there. All right? You know who you are if that happened. It's not that you did anything wrong, but what you were doing is when you started adding up all of your area, you were exceeding the size that you were giving it. For example, if you were making that 90%, all right, and let's say that you made that 30, 30, and 30, well, that's 90%. Yeah, but there's also the browser may have margin and it may have padding that it's set up. So what it does is it says, I don't have enough room to put it here. And if you floated it to the right, it just moves it down. All right? That's exactly the type of thing that they're talking about in here. So they go through some examples. Notice the difference again. Fixed versus fluid. All right? So they're fixed, pixels, fluid, percentages. All right? And notice 62.5 and 37.5. Now you might look at that and go, wait a minute, 62, that's 100%. Right? Yeah, it's 100% of 960. It's not 100% of the screen necessarily. All right? But it's 100% of what you've said the size of that should be. So again, for this to totally make sense, I think it would be in your best interest to really read through this paragraph or this chapter. In fact, if you've got time, do it today, so when we start going over the bootstrap stuff tomorrow, you're like, nothing will be a big surprise to you. And here's the benefits. I'm not going to read this to you. It looks more professional. It scales better. It's responsive. All right? So you should understand the difference between a fixed layout, which uses absolute measurements, and a fluid layout, which uses typically percentages. All right. Then they go through how you can convert one to the other, and they give you a formula right here. I'll let you take a look at that yourselves. Then they describe what the whole formula is. There's other ways that you can do it as well. All right. So how to use other units of measure with responsive design. And if you look right here, because people look at some of this stuff and they're very confused. All right. VH, VW, VMin, Vmax. Well, I've got a question for you. I'm asking you this. Remember this? What did I do here? This is the thing that I automatically get set up for me when I go into Atom and I hit the exclamation point and I hit tab. This is the template that it creates for me. One thing we've never really talked about is this line. That line must be put in if your intention is to create a site that is responsive. All right? Where it says name equal viewport, that's whatever media you're using to look at the web page. Could be a phone, could be a tablet, could be a laptop, doesn't matter. All right? This says I want to be able to, by default, to use all the width that's available to me. And that becomes really important when you're working with a phone. I mean, even if you've got a bigger phone, all right, they're not that big. And as you take and try to pinch and zoom in and out, you've got even less area. All right? And this says the initial scale, that 1.0 means 100%. I want it to scale to 100%. All right? So why am I showing you that? Because with viewport, you can come in and you can work with the viewport's height with minimum and maximum. So you've even got control over that. All right. How to size fonts. We're going to go over, I think it's chapter 12, but I don't remember. There's a chapter that goes through in here that talks a little bit more about fonts. But the author says, hey, if you've been doing what hopefully your instructor told you to do since the beginning of the semester, you've been using M's as opposed to using points and pixels. We have been. All right. And the author says the size of the font that's used by the element is relative to the size of the font used by the parent element. All right. So as much as it possibly can, when you work with fonts using M's, Rems, etc., it will scale. So it will look nice on any type of device. You know, because I told you this, that an M is equal to 16 pixels. You may or may not be aware of this, but by default, okay, when you work with most websites on most browsers, not 100%, all right, but the default website or the default font size is usually 16 pixels. It's 1M. So if I want it to be 1.5 times that, I set it to 1.5M. Now think about why you'd want to do that. I don't know. I don't know if I've ever even been out there. I think hopefully you've all at least heard of AARP, AARP, you know, the American Association of Retired People, I think. All right. But if I was creating a thing for them, I may want to make the font size bigger because most of the people looking at that are probably going to be in their mid-60s and above. All right. So you'll have to always look at it based on who your audience is. All right. How to scale images. What's cool about this is what's really nice is typically about the only thing you have to do in order to scale an image is to put that line in. Max width 100%. What that says is, regardless of what size the image is, it's going to be in a certain area on the screen. Have it take up as much of that area as you possibly can. That's what it means. He says, why don't I always want it to be like that? Then you wouldn't use that. But that will take your images and make them responsive. All right? Maybe you don't want to do that. So notice the second example. Instead of max width 100%, you say max width 400 pixels. That says it'll scale, but when it gets to a certain point, regardless of where you're looking at it, don't have it be any wider than 400 pixels. All right? So again, you have control when you're using this over how it's being used. So as it says, to create a scalable image, you remove those height and width things that we set before. Those heights and widths that we set. So if you said a picture on the leavemeathome.com thing was 350 by 250, that's 350 pixels by 250 pixels. All right? Those are not relative units of measure. All right, so the next thing they show here in Figure 8.8 is a web page that uses fluid design. There it is, okay? But it says it uses fluid layout where the widths, the margins, and the padding are coded as percentages. That way they always try to scale as you take this size and make it bigger and smaller. Both of the images on the page are scalable. So both this one here and this one here. And I can't tell you how many times I've gone out to a site that's not responsive. The first thing that most people think when they see a site that's not responsive is, this is not a professional site. It just doesn't look professional. Now, when you get all done, be it the leavemeathome.com site or some other one we create in here, you know, be it your portfolio or whatever, you know, a site to most web people is never done. You might have it, look at it, go, this is done, this is it, this is what I want. Until you look at it the next day and you're like, you know, if I just tweak this, if I just tweak that, that's just normal to do that. All right, but we want these to look as professional as possible. Notice the font sizes are coded in M's. When you code it in M's, the font size doesn't change. It tries to scale based on what you're using. But if you say something is 1M, 16 pixels, it's 16 pixels. Well, how do you change it? So if you shrink it, you only want it to be 10 pixels. Then you've got to use media queries that we're going to talk about after the break. All right, so again, as the width of the page is reduced, it becomes more difficult to use. To get around that, you use media queries. All right, so that's what we're up to right now. It is 9:54. Let's take a healthy break. Come back at 10:10, so 16 minutes, please, from right now. when you get all the way through it, it does something like when you do the when you do your CSS and it gives you that little symbol. You know what I'm saying? When your stuff validates cleanly, it should give you a little frog symbol when you get all the way done with it. Then I'll have to check because I know it did, unless they've changed it, but it did last year.
Can we just take like a screenshot of these and all green?
Yeah. Devin just said, can you take a screenshot where it kind of shows a picture where everything's green on there, meaning it's all done? Yeah, you can do that too. Like I said, my thing is what I don't want is I don't want people to say, well, you never gave us anything like that. Like I said, I'm going to try to minimize whatever we end up putting on a test for this stuff.